Hi everyone. This is Ranmay here, back with your show E-Copy with Expert. Today we have Paris Vega with us, who is the Chief Growth Officer at The Nine. Welcome, Paris.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Just before we move any forward, I would like you to help us understand more about your journey thus far and also help us understand what The Nine is all about, and we'll take it forward from there.
All right. So for the past 20 years or so, I've been working in a lot of different roles across different companies, and I've started my own projects, started my own companies here and there, have had very few successes, but a couple, and many failures along the way. I think anybody who's got an entrepreneurial itch probably has more failures than successes usually. And that's definitely been my experience. But yeah, 20 years ago about is when I graduated from college from the University of Alabama with a degree in graphic design, digital media, minored in business. And while I was in college, I started doing freelance design work and actually got to use some of my freelance work as my coursework in school. So I was getting grades and I was getting paid for the same work. And I just kept doing freelancing after I graduated until I decided to get a job at an internet marketing company is what they called themselves back then. And they focused on truck driver recruiting. And so they built websites, and one of the first websites actually where truck drivers could apply online back in, I think it started in 1999, and I started working there for the first time in 2002 as a part-time worker while I was in college, and then I got a full-time job with them in 2006 after college. But yeah, it was one of the first websites. Bestdriverjobs.com was the website, and truck drivers could apply online, and then their application would get sent to multiple trucking companies, and the companies would get those leads and be able to hire truck drivers. And my first role there was like emailing companies to try and get them to add a link to the website, some old school SEO link building tactics. I think my first job was actually just gathering email addresses of companies that the actual SEO people were going to email later.
Okay.
And so that was my first job dipping into digital marketing.
Great. And I also see that you host your own podcast. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, the First Customers podcast is all about how different business owners, entrepreneurs, CEOs, marketing folks, how they got the very first customers for a business, because I think that that's one of the most important moments of a business, when you might have a product or an idea or a service and you start out with zero, no money coming in, no customers most of the time, and going from zero to something. That first customer is a special moment for any entrepreneur. And so I started a podcast just focusing on that moment, because I've been there so many times where sometimes you'd never get that first customer because the idea or the project just didn't work. It wasn't a good fit for the market or whatever. Nobody wanted what you made. And then when you do get a customer and you get that kind of confirmation that what you're doing actually matters to somebody, and you get paid for something that you've come up with or a business that you started, it's an awesome moment. And so that's the topic we explore, and we try to keep it pretty focused on that moment in a business. I think other entrepreneurs and executives listen to the show and have given me some good feedback that there's a lot of insights you can gain from learning from what others are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then, like we were discussing earlier, you have had a long career. Over these last 20 years, you have seen so much in terms of, like you mentioned, so many companies, few succeeded, few failed, but there's a lot of experience throughout, right? Can you please outline some key considerations that these budding entrepreneurs who are listening today to keep focus upon while strategizing that sustainable long-term growth?
Okay, I think one of the most interesting things I've learned is being a part of different companies, starting out obviously just as an employee, just like most people, just an employee at a company, and you get your first experience from that perspective. Then over the years, moving into maybe some mid-tier management, and then trying to start my own projects, and then eventually joined a project that took off and worked really well after a lot of failure for years. And the one that worked, I think the biggest thing that I learned, and it stayed around for years and was eventually sold and did well, but the biggest thing that stood out for me was that at different moments in the company's growth, you have to change your strategy, your tactics at that kind of top level, because the things you do to start a company aren't necessarily the things you need to do to grow the company, and aren't necessarily the things you need to do to maintain and manage the company and keep it alive. There's new things that you have to start doing, and some things you might have to stop doing at different levels as a company grows. And there's very clear phases, it seems, at least from my experience, where it was like, at first it was crazy nonstop work, 7 days a week, all hours of the day, every waking moment we poured into the company and tried to get it off the ground until we had customers coming in. And then just that initial chaos of just taking over our lives at first. And that's not what I would call long-term sustainable work habits, but to get something started and off the ground, a lot of times it seems like it takes that kind of work, depending on the industry you're in and the type of project you're trying to do. It's possible to build companies in different ways and use different styles, but for the project we were working on, it took some insanity up front. But eventually, as the project stabilized, we had a much more healthy work-life balance, because instead of trying to create something from scratch, we were just in optimization mode. And so it's, at first you're giving birth, and that process is extreme and can be painful. And then you're okay, we've got something that's a legit company here. It's making money. Customers are happy with the service. As long as we keep it alive and keep making it better, stay with us. And that's a much more manageable place to be in. And the different phases are really interesting. And then at the end, when you try to sell a project, it's another change in kind of the moment of your company's history and the things you need to do, and preparing to be audited and all that kind of thing, all for the due diligence and everything that comes with selling a company. Totally different moment there. And at that project, I moved around to tons of different roles because my mindset was just whatever the company needs, whatever would be the best use of my specific skills at any given point in the company, I would try to move towards that role. And so I would repeatedly ask myself that question, like, all right, is what I'm working on something that only I can work on, or is it the best thing that I can work on, given my skill set and the team's skill set? Or do I need to delegate this or ask for help from somebody else who can do this better or faster, so that I can just focus on the things that I'm the best at, or at least the only one or the best person for a given task, so that we can move forward more effectively, efficiently, just faster overall. And so I think that's a combination of things that entrepreneurs need to ask themselves is, what phase are you at in your company? What's required at the given phase that you're at in the life cycle of your company? And then what are you doing each day or each moment? What are you spending your time, energy, and attention on? Your tea, so to speak. You don't want to spill your TEA, your time, energy, and attention. You don't want to spill it on things that are not worthy of your life force, so to speak. And so it's important to always ask yourself, is what I'm working on what I specifically should be working on, or should I delegate this to somebody else? And that's even if you're not the top person at the company, because I wasn't in this case. I was just one of the kind of manager, partner level people. But I just saw that as being a responsible partner, was asking myself that kind of a question on a regular basis.
I see. A lot of experience there, Paris. As someone who has handled multiple roles, like you did mention about the fact that you have started at ground up, you have been at different managerial positions, senior level positions, mid-level positions. And in terms of having that experience all through these years, how do you approach the task of aligning teams with different responsibilities towards the unified or the same growth vision of the organization?
I think that communication is one of the most important things. Clarity of communication, consistency in your communication, following through with what you tell your teams. I think that's extremely important, that if there is a clear vision from the top down I guess that's the first part, is the leadership needs to have a clear vision of what's trying to be done, where the company needs to go, and then clearly communicate that vision and how all the teams can contribute to that vision in a very clear way, and then make sure that the incentives of each team align with that vision of the direction of the company, and that their incentives are in line with that. The rewards that they get for doing a great job will make them work towards what you're trying to accomplish as a company. And I've been a part of projects that did that really well, and others that haven't done that well at all, and some that are in the process of trying to do that better. But I think that's really important because, again, that time, energy, and attention, you want to make sure that everybody on the team is putting that in the right place so we're all going the same direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And then let's move on to digital marketing. You have been in this space for so long as well. If you can throw some light upon the most impactful strategies that you would have employed in your setups to foster revenue for companies or your clients, and especially during the initial stages of development, because like we were discussing earlier, that's the difficult part, to crack that first client, to get that first invoice. So what would be your strategy, or what has been successful strategies in your career so far?
Something that I've learned through the First Customers podcast, talking to all these different entrepreneurs and businesses, and some of them agency owners as well, about how they're getting their customers. One of the patterns that I'm seeing is talking to your target audience as much as possible. So first, that would mean you need to clearly define who your target audience is and what your service is. What problem are you solving for a very specific target audience, a specific group of people? And does your marketing, messaging, your service design, everything about your company, does it fully solve that problem for a specific target audience, so that you can clearly communicate that solution and show the benefits of what you do and how it would change their life? Whatever type of product or service it is, there's that the assumption is that your business makes their life better in some way. And so clearly defining who your target audience is and how you solve that specific problem that your business exists to solve is crucial. But once you have your target audience defined, it's not just through like social posts and a bunch of blog content for SEO and all that. It's not just through those means. I'm saying, like, what I've noticed, it seems like the people who have the most success figure out ways to connect with that target audience, whether it's through maybe leaning on video a little more, or doing things like going to events and actually talking to people who are in that audience, or creating events that attracts that target audience or is for that specific target audience. And so when you have that direct communication with the people that you're trying to serve, you can learn way more than just sitting back and doing A/B testing on a Facebook ad for different types of copy. You can get somewhere with that, but it's not the same as having a conversation with your real customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we did speak about growth as well, which can be multifaceted or encompassing not just revenue. We also talk about a brand has grown. From that perspective, talking about brand recognition, market share, there's so many facets to so-called growth that we all talk about. So how do you approach balancing these aspects while formulating the growth strategies for your clients?
Could you explain that a little more?
Sure. Just wanted to understand your take on the concept of growth for any given brand.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, my role, having growth in the title, I think it can mean a lot of different things at different companies. And there's a lot of ways to look at that. But for me personally, like how I mentioned the way that I worked at past projects, I tend to look at the internal operations of the company first. All the outward stuff, like your SEO and your digital marketing, your social marketing, content marketing, video marketing, all that stuff, the visual branding and your kind of interaction with the world. That's all important for sure. And it needs to align with your company's goals and messaging and your product service, all that, your speak to the target audience, like I was saying. But I think one of the most important things, though, is the internal operations of the company. And so that's where I've focused a lot of my attention here recently at the companies I'm involved with, of trying to figure out how we can better operate and better structure the company and our services and our processes, believing that will lead to a lot more growth. Because once you solve your internal problems and build your internal processes and everything, then it's like a deeper way of solving the external problems, because building an internal system for posting content on a regular basis is a much better way to spend your time than just directly going and trying to write a bunch of blog posts one day. So it's that philosophy of, they talk about with entrepreneurship, you want to work on your business, not in your business.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's where I lean towards, is trying to figure out how can we build a better machine, a bit better system that will then create the things that cause us to grow, versus different growth hacking type tactics. Although I guess something that is more outward is the podcast that I started. There is obvious potential for it. I've been able to connect to more people. So I think that podcasting is a great thing for companies to do, because you do build your network, you build a little awareness, you grow a little bit of an audience, and you get to almost have an automatic salesperson or branding person just out there in the world, just like your content does for you on your website. It can be a 24/7 salesperson for you if it's done well. And if you have a podcast, like one of my guests has a podcast that's super specific about HubSpot, and they just talk about how to use HubSpot in all these different ways. And so they became an authority in that niche, and they get lots of leads every month. They've gotten like 1,000 so far since they started their channel.
Oh, wow.
And that's just from posting about all the different ways you can use HubSpot to make your business better. And they've become that voice, and they're known for that. And so they get hired to help people use HubSpot, to get trained on HubSpot. And I think that's one, podcasting is really powerful because of that. They were saying that they basically, and this was Ali Schwanke on the First Customers podcast. She was telling me that the listeners of her podcast basically feel like they know her, have somewhat of a relationship. And so by the time they contact them, they are already a very warm or a hot lead. And they basically, their first meeting with them is basically a sales closing meeting, because they've already watched maybe hours of her on video. And so it turns what would usually be a cold or warm lead into a very hot, ready to buy lead, because you've got this kind of automated relationship building happening through the YouTube channel.
Yeah, absolutely. Can totally agree to that. Yeah. Great, yeah, Paris. It was lovely speaking with you, and really thankful for taking our time and doing this podcast with us. Yeah. Really appreciate your time, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.